am going to tell you about climate change and the U.S. military. These are things we don't think are associated with each other, but they are. So this week, the U.S. military is leading a climate change conference called War and Climate Week. It is the Pentagon's attempt to combat climate change. I'm going to show you a little video. It's so drummed up, we're gonna take on the new enemy is climate change, right? It's very, Well, a Department of Defense spokesperson said that climate change will now shape our security environment. They say that more than 1,700 military bases around the world are at risk from rising sea levels, so we've got to protect those. So that's why the military wants to combat climate change, not so, we all have food and a place to live, but to protect military bases and also to keep the military from having to put out, forest fires and rescue people from floods. So, okay, whatever gets you to care. But the military also says that thawing climates will result in a new frontier of geostrategic competition with Russia. And this is where I think this is interesting. This is where the interest in climate really lies for the military, is a war with Russia. So a recent Carnegie report from last year lays out why the West is so focused on the Arctic ambitions. This is the report right here. It says that Russia has been interested in this region since the 16th century for more or less resources and trading routes. It says that this area could be integral in winning an unlikely but potentially catastrophic war in Europe. Well, okay, this was a year ago. That is no longer unlikely. So the West is concerned that Russia has access to these routes and geography because it does not want Russia to have that. What is at odds here is this Northern Sea route pictured here. It's a shipping route officially defined by Russian legislation. The entire route lies in Arctic waters and within Russia's exclusive economic zone. Now, according to Carnegie, this signals the return to a version of its Cold War era posture centered around long-standing missions of protecting the sanctuaries of its ballistic missile submarine fleet and operations in the North Atlantic in the event of a war with Europe. Yet the Russian military is resuming these missions with fewer resources and facing a more formidable array of adversary capabilities than during the Cold War. Now, this is interesting because China supports Russia's claim to this area. That is noteworthy. This is a pro-NATO report, and it says that the U.S. and NATO should discourage Russia from taking over these routes. So here is why the West is scared. If you could just go to the next one, number 5. Thank you. The Russia is it lays out right here why the West is scared. The role of oil and gas in Russia's Arctic ambition was highlighted in 2006 as a part of the Kremlin's agenda to establish the country as an energy superpower and justify its inclusion in the G8.3. Rising temperatures would make those riches more accessible and ensure that the Kremlin has a steady source of revenues as well as market and geopolitical influence in Europe and Asia. And without any contenders to challenge these ambitions, Russia has a shot at securing its place as a major geopolitical presence in the Arctic. Now, further, this trade route allows Russia to sell oil and gas to Asia and not only rely on European markets. This has happened, right? Russia can still sell to Asia without sanctions. That's not happening there. Now see this next one, number 6. It says, Arctic navigation and maritime access to Asia will enable it to reduce its dependence on Europe, which it sees as hostile and increasingly intent on constraining Russia through a military buildup on its border and seemingly endless economic sanctions. So the West cannot control Asia like it controls Europe. Therefore, NATO cannot let Russia have this plan B, right? Also worth mentioning that Russia has ballistic missiles on this Kola Peninsula If you take a look, this is what we're talking about. It's right on the border here of Norway, Finland, Sweden. That's where these missiles are kept. So NATO and the U.S. military are concerned about Russia keeping Russia from this northern sea route and also being near their ballistic missile stores. And that pesky climate change will get in the way. So, of course, the military wants to deal with it. So I'm being a bit pessimistic here, right? Saying that the West now cares about climate change when our sort of business practices don't show that to be the case. But it is interesting that this is the military motivation. So that gives this Western military industrial complex reason to not want climate change. But will the military industrial complex take any real responsibility for climate change? Here are some numbers to consider. A B-52 stealth bomber uses 4 gallons of jet fuel per mile and emits 250 metric tons of greenhouse gas over its 6,000-mile range. A Humvee uses 4 to 8 miles per gallon of diesel. Aircraft carriers and naval ships are also gas guzzlers. According to one recent report, the U.S. Department of Defense has accounted for roughly 80% of United States federal government energy consumption since 2001. This is crazy to me. So when you think of your tax dollars funding the government, but 80% of the government's energy consumption is in defense, right? In 2017, the Department of Defense emitted over 59 million metric tons, which if viewed as its own nation, would put the Department of Defense alone as the world's 55th largest greenhouse gas emitter. By contrast, in Australia, the emission for the military was just 913 metrics in 2017. Now, consider the carbon footprint of making weaponry, not merely using it, but like making it in factories, shipping it, right, with gas-powered vehicles. A bomb consists, of course, many components that have to be mined from the earth and shipped to a factory before being shipped into battle. And now consider that the U.S. recently said that it cannot track all weapons it sends to Ukraine and is pretty much fine with that. Weapons makers met in Washington just last week to continue discussing these plans. So while the government can tell citizens to drive less and consume less and deal with inflation, that is not a problem when it comes to war. Polluting for war is fine, but we're a bit worried about it now if it exacerbates territorial concerns, right? Not to mention the impact of a nuclear war. A 2009 paper estimated that even a very limited nuclear exchange, which just today Russia mentioned a nuclear exchange, they did not say limited, right? They said nuclear war.
Well, what's a limited nuclear exchange, by the way?
The way they defined it is like a baby bomb, like a little one,
Yeah.
even if there was a tiny one.
Just a few million people destroyed. That's
Right.
just like a little baby nuclear.
I mean, I guess there are capacities, right? But they're saying even if it was just like one nuclear bomb would cause up to 690 tons of carbon to enter the atmosphere. That's equal to what the entire United Kingdom emits in a year. So while the military thinks about how to protect the environment for its own goals, it will not send weapons or use them, right, for this pursuit. And just to put a fine point of how dire this is, just today, the United Nations says that the world will face 1.5 disasters per day by 2030 due to the spiral of self-destruction that humans have inflicted upon ourselves. The report literally straight out blames human activity and nothing else. It says that changing course is a now or never scenario. So sure, what can we do if our government and our leaders won't cooperate? In my house, we try to do a lot, right? We have solar panels. We have an electric car. We compost. We have a garden. We try not to use single-use plastics. Just today, we bought the chickens I told you about so we can have sustainable eggs. But what difference does it make if our tax money is buying heavy carbon-emitting bombs and weaponry? Will the military climate conference come to some obvious conclusion that making and deploying weapons is literally shooting itself and the rest of us in the foot? War not only kills people, it also kills the planet, and no one is talking about it. So in my opinion, we must demand that our lawmakers de-escalate this conflict with words and not bombs in order to save human lives and Mother Earth.
I mean, the idea, I mean, just think about the carbon footprint of one of these tanks or what,
I think about it every day. Every time I see it, and they're just like, they make for good background, like blown up vehicles, which will leach chemicals into that soil and have an effect on the people who live in that area, who then eat from that soil, right? It's awful.
I mean, you think about the pit burnings in in the Middle East. You think about just all of the refuse and leftover garbage.
Depleted uranium bullets.
Yeah.
Is another one that causes problems.
I was just thinking about that. You don't have to use nuclear. I mean, don't even talk about nuclear weapons. Just talk about like the depleted uranium. That gets fired into these things, into the drinking water. They don't care about these people at all.
I mean, I went down a rabbit hole to try and figure out, like, what is the carbon footprint of any one piece of weaponry, but unfortunately the components of the weapons are top secret, so I can't really know, right? So I know like the sort of roundabout what it is, but weapons continue to get higher and higher tech, so we have to think it's at the very least it has the carbon footprint of anything that runs on microchips. So it's really hard to tell. And of course, we're not going to get, so the government can pass all kinds of legislation saying, well, we want our publicly traded companies or private companies to give us these carbon footprint reports so that at least we know, right? But the military is held to no such, to no such standards. Yet again, 80% of government emissions comes from the military, and we don't get any accounting for this.
Yeah, that is amazing to think about. So, what's her name can get up there and what's her name? Greta Thunberg.
Yes.
She can yell at, she can yell at all these CEOs all she wants. But what we really need to be doing is yelling at the governments I mean, again, if a huge component and a huge amount of the Pentagon spending, and Raytheon makes 95% of their money from U.S. taxpayers funneling these weapons, of course it's going to keep this cycle going. Thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. We've been banned, we've been blocked, we've been censored. That's why we started our own website, to stay connected with you for free.
That's right. So head on over to redacted.inc and make sure you're connected with us. You can sign up again at redacted.inc, not .com.